As we discussed in our Countries in World War II summed up in less than 30-second series, many countries which participated in the war don't get the recognition they deserved. Often when people think of World War II, they think of the heavyweights like Germany, Japan, Great Britain, the US, and Russia. But what about a country like Brazil, the land of the cobras fumantes, the smoking snakes? While this South American country didn't declare war on Germany and Italy until the latter half of 1942, they entered the war with the hiss, going toe-to-toe with more military-equipped enemies in both the Battle of the Atlantic and the Mediterranean theatre. When thinking of Brazil and its involvement in World War II, it's easiest to think of it as two distinct forces, the Brazilian Navy and the Força Expedicionária Brasileira, the FEB, which from English to Portuguese translates to the Brazilian Expeditionary Force. The Brazilian Navy, bolstered by portions of its air force, battled it out in the Atlantic, while the FEB, a force for both the army and air, fought in the Mediterranean, most notably on the Italian front. With these two stages of war and their Brazilian participants clarified, let's plummet into the Atlantic for a closer look. With German U-boats operating unopposed between Brazil and West Africa, the US negotiated with Brazil to construct air bases along their coast. Up until this point, the Axis hadn't been targeting Brazil craft anywhere, but perceiving the construction of the aforementioned American bases as a sign that Brazil had abandoned its neutrality, they set them in their sights. In the first half of 1942, German U-boats put 13 Brazilian merchant ships under the waves, and later that year, one single German sub, the infamous U-507, put 5 Brazilian ships under in a single day. These attacks, which claimed the lives of some 1,600 civilians and sailors, inspired the Brazilian government to make their opposition to Germany official through a declaration of war. While a Brazilian aircraft had attempted to open the guts of an Italian submarine, the Barbarigo, before the devastation of the infamous U-507, the Navy and Air Force's primary mission following Brazil's official commitment to the war was to protect Allied ships between the Atlantic and Gibraltar. With Allied help, the Brazilian Navy took over 600 convoys under their wing and aided over 3,000 merchant and military transport ships to their destinations and struck at German subs over 60 times. Warring with their enemies in the depths of the sea, the Brazilians lost over 1,000 merchant marines and Navy sailors, though perhaps the greatest travesty inflicted upon them was inflicted by themselves, when a crew member accidentally shot a 20mm gun into the explosives stored at the stern of the warship Bahia during target practice. She sunk in 3 minutes, eventuating in the death of more than 300 men. Ish, imagine being that guy. One particular Nazi hunt that demonstrated the cooperation of the Brazilians and the Yanks was the pursuit of U-199, a type IXD Unterseeboot, which, if you didn't know, quite literally translates into undersea boat. As U-199 came up from the surface just off Rio de Janeiro like some terrible iron whale, an American PBM Marina and 2 Brazilian planes, a PBY Catalina and a Lockheed Hudson, attacked her, the Catalina opening her to the sea with depth charges. You might be wondering what I mean when I said the cobras fumantes, the smoking snakes. Well, before the Brazilians joined the war and flipped the meaning of the phrase on its head, it used to mean something along the lines of the FED will go to war when snakes take to smoking pipes, similar to the Adinaton when pigs fly. Once the FED did carve their way up through Italy, they continued to use and sort of own this phrase, writing it on their mortars and adopting the motif of a pipe-smoking snake on their badges. Now, due to limitations in transport, the FED, which was 25,000 strong, much reduced from the Brazilian government's initial estimate of 65 to almost 100,000, but still nothing to laugh at, was moved from Brazil to Italy and war in 5 sections. The first section, made of around 5,000 men, arrived in Naples in July of 1944 without weapons and without a place to stay. Just like how I'll arrive when I go to Europe, except for the without weapons part. Lingering in the cold, dusty stationing area, the Brazilian soldiers in their olive green outfits, which resembled more that of the United States, were actually confused by some for German prisoners of war. So overall, their morale would have been pretty low. Detailed in a prior agreement with the US, the FED were finally supplied with some clothing fit for an Italian winter, and some equipment fit for war. Though this took time and hindered FED training by the more experienced US Army. In fact, the Americans deemed the 2 or so months of training that the FED received prior to be practically worthless, and as you might expect, took command of the FED, much to the demoralization of Brazilian officers. In June 1944, this first section of the FED left Naples for Tarquinia in the province of Viterbo, Lazio, where they received arms, equipment, and command under the US Fifth Army. About a month later, they moved closer to the fight, near to the confrontation line at the Arno River, where they received some of their most crucial military training and regained some of the morale that was stripped from them in their pants-down arrival to the Italian front. With the 4th US Army Corps dangerously short on manpower, a FED detachment was sent to reinforce them. Their first mission was to relieve US troops in the action zone between the Serchio Valley and the sea. The Brazilians in this detachment were the first to taste war in the Italian front, and with that very first taste, they hungered for more, penetrating some 40 kilometers into the Serchio Valley between mid-September to the end of October 1944. After a succession of victories from Massa Rossa to Barga, the FED were redirected to a base at the border of Tuscany and Emilia-Romagna, where they fought in the Frigid Mountains on the Gothic Line. In another demonstration of cooperation between the Brazilians and the Yanks, between February and March 1945, the FED detachment toiled alongside the US 10th Mountain Division to, after returning from brutal German counterattacks with lessons learnt, banish the Germans from crucial artillery positions perched on the northern Apennines. Monte Castello was one of such positions, and the battle for it didn't occur overnight, but from November 1944 to February 1945, through the midst of a cruel winter and over jagged, crumbling ridges and slopes. Here, the FED were fighting an uphill battle against nestled defenses, artillery, mortars, machine guns, rifles, for 4 months. After a failed assault in which the Brazilians copped 150 casualties, as opposed to the German casualty count of only 17, a German captain told an FED captive, "Frankly, you Brazilians are either crazy or very brave. I never saw anyone advance against machine guns and well-defended positions with such disregard for life. You are devils." Much of the Allied victory in the final assault on Monte Castello, called Operation Encore, was credited to a Brazilian artillery division who cannonaded the summit of Monte Castello and made passage for the rest of the FED. Overall, this particular battle was of great symbolic importance to Brazilians and the fighting spirit of the FED, cementing their status as a force to be reckoned with in the remainder of World War II and beyond. FED victories in the northern Apennines granted the Allies passage into Bologna and ramped them into the final assault on the Italian front, which ultimately led to the unconditional surrender of the German-Italian army and the capture of more than 13,000 Axis troops by the Smoking Snakes alone. Before World War II, many Brazilian soldiers had never even endured anything close to the harsh European winters that was present in Italy upon their arrival. These men, the soldiers of the FED, spent most of their trip being ill, only to receive a sickly greeting by the Allies in Naples and sleep in a dust crater. They rocked up to the Italian winter without clothes and to war without guns. They were told by the Yanks that their prior training was pretty much worthless, and after a crash course in fighting elite Wehrmacht troops, were thrown into battle alongside experienced US soldiers. And despite all of this, despite them basically winging it, they managed to punch through crucial Axis holdings and help slingshot the Allies to victory in the Italian campaign. Brazil's international position following the war may have been different if, as desired by the Americans, the FED had remained in Europe as part of the Allied occupational forces. But let's save the politics between Brazil and the US, both prior to and following their contribution to World War II, for another video. There's a lot of ground to cover there, a lot going on under the iron covers of war. I guess the triumphs of the Smoking Snakes in the Italian front sort of make up for the self-destruction of the warship Bahia in the Atlantic. Sort of. But on that sinking, and to wrap up the video, which World War II blunder do you consider to be the most ridiculous? It doesn't have to be the largest or most catastrophic per se, but more so the most avoidable or outright improbable? Let me know in the comments section below. And just before you go guys, make sure you check out all those juicy links in the description below to follow us on Facebook, donate to the Patreon to help the channel out more than you already are by watching this video, and join our Discord to interact with other like-minded history buffs. Anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something new.